Hi, I'm Terry Murison. Welcome to Terry's Doing It, a podcast where we celebrate the efforts of inspirational people who seize the day, doing things that if they left them undone, they might not be able to live with themselves. Today's guest is my friend, John DeDakis. He gets it. He had a foot in both lives when he was still an editor for CNN in Atlanta in 1995 and writing his first novel, Fast Track. His second life overtook him in 2013 when he retired to write full-time. We began our friendship with a shared affinity for integrity in political and religious leadership, for moral character and truth, and now for telling stories, writing, and podcasting. Let's meet John. Welcome, John. Good to see you.
Hi, Terry. It's good to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, yes, anytime. I'd like to start talking about you in generalities so that we can go to specifics later.
Okay.
I read that you said that success is when you've done your best and you have a sense of accomplishment because of it. How has that factored into your decisions that you've made in your life, or has it?
Well, I think that for the longest time, growing up, and this is probably true of just about everybody, those early years are fraught. And especially, the teenage times when you're trying to figure out who you are. So, even though I had goals, I had very specific goals in mind. Getting there was difficult, and I think that that's probably no different from anybody else. And I mean, I had a successful career. I mean, I was in journalism for 45 years, 25 at CNN, but I don't think that I really had a sense of success until I retired in 2013, because by that time I had 3 novels published and I was a manuscript editor. And as I moved into retirement, I was able to move into, in a more fulsome way, using the gifts and talents that I've got by being the person who made things happen as opposed to things that were happening to me that I had to respond to. So I got to write my books. I got to work with people who wanted to write their novels and things like that. I got a chance to teach and things, those kind of things that were in my comfort zone and spoke to my core motivation. I think my core motivation in life is to encourage other people. And when you find yourself being able to do what you love to do and what you're good at, that's success. It's not fame, it's not money, it's just being in sync with who you really are.
And that's the sweet spot.
It is. It really is. I think so.
Well, so John, I know that you're a man of faith. And I want to paint a picture for you. At the end of your life, when St. Peter greets you at the pearly gates, will he say, John, come on in. Your life has been a success. And why?
Oh man, you're going cosmic on me right away. Oh geez. Look, my spirituality has evolved over time. And I'll get to your answer, but I want to get there the back door way, I guess you could say. I mean, I was raised in the Episcopal Church, which is sort of Catholics that flunk their Latin, or same rituals, less guilt. And it was, my parents loved each other. They were pillars of the church. And so it was and it wasn't a guilt-ridden kind of experience. So I wasn't guilted into believing anything. In fact, if anything, the Episcopal Church allows for doubt and questions. It's not a top-down bureaucracy. And so I would say that in the college years, I tended toward hedonism, agnosticism. I was really going for atheism at that point, and things just didn't seem meaningful. Had an encounter with someone from Campus Crusade for Christ, which, they were making their door-to-door appeal. I was at the University of Wisconsin. This is in the late 60s when the anti-Vietnam fervor was going on, and Jesus was depicted as a revolutionary, which was certainly attractive to me. And so I responded to the message. of, God loves you, has a wonderful plan for your life. We all have fallen short of the ideal. Jesus bridged the gap. And so I responded to that. And but it wasn't a typical conversion story. The typical conversion story is your life is a mess. You find Jesus and everything's wonderful. Um, After I, made that acceptance decision, things got worse. I actually considered suicide. And it took a couple of years to really understand what was going on spiritually. Didn't really crystallize, I think, until I was in the Army. And in the Army, it was either, sex, dope, alcohol, or Jesus. It was those were pretty much the four choices, and I chose Jesus. And I was in with a group called Navigators, which, looking back on it, is very legalistic. It's a very legalistic, almost fundamental kind of organization, but they stressed scripture memory and discipleship and things like that. So I'm so sorry to be taking such a long
No,
time to answer this
that's
question,
okay.
but it's an important topic to get into. And so my life really did stabilize during that time. I mean, the Bible was real to me. I mean, I prayed, I got my life together. There was purpose in life. So fast forward for, maybe 40 years. So there's this stability that's going on. Um, Never warmed to anything having to do with religious extremism. I still brought my doubts to the table, and I think that God is not threatened by doubt. I think that that's not irreligious. That is just being human. Um, uh, I've, we all go through different challenges, and faith was an important component to that. But then Trump came along, and the evangelicals went gaga over Trump. And I always thought the evangelicals were family values. Well, here's a guy who, is in every way anti-family and irreligious and not pious. And yet, for some reason, it became a power trip for the evangelicals. And I apologize for painting such a broad brush, because I have evangelical friends who did not go for Trump. But I no longer identify as an evangelical because of Trump and because of the extremists within the Republican Party. So, to answer your question, I don't have a case to make to St. Peter. I mean, I understand that, Jesus died for my sins, but not everybody buys that. Not everybody's even heard of Jesus. Maybe they have. But I think I'm just going to have to roll with it and go. I mean, I'm not perfect. I know I fall short. And so I'm just going to have to go, here I am, and you're going to have to do with me as you will. And that's that. How am I doing? Is this making any
No,
sense?
it makes total sense. And I think the point at which we met, you were really grappling with a lot of those things. Donald Trump was on the ascendancy, and
Yeah.
and you, like I, were very concerned about the juxtaposition of what the Bible says and what the church was doing.
Right.
So those are valid concerns, and I appreciate you sharing them. You grew up in Wisconsin.
Right.
You wanted to be a lawyer. You
Right.
wanted to go into politics,
Right.
but you got a BA in journalism at the University of Wisconsin in Madison in
That's right.
77.
Right.
So, on a personal level, it appears to me your life would be a success. You had the job, you married Cindy, who was an accomplished choral conductor.
You've done your research, ma'am.
Oh, yeah. I was shaking in my boots to interview you, John.
My goodness. Just me.
So, you had three kids. You
Right.
had Emily, who is a PhD in creative writing in Belfast. You had James, who's a professional drummer and owns a media production company, lives in Oregon. And you also had a son, Stephen, who we'll talk about shortly, who was a musician and a cook, but who died unexpectedly of a heroin overdose in 2011. So, about the time we got to know each other, there were things swirling around you. You had started to write your book, your first book. You were still with Wolf Blitzer, and we'll get to that. But I want to know, okay, so let's go back to your early career.
Sure.
When you claimed to be a just the facts, ma'am journalist.
Right.
In Wisconsin, in Germany, Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Atlanta. So let's go through a couple of noteworthy events.
Okay.
You were tear gassed in Wisconsin in 1970. How did that happen?
Well, I have to correct the record just in one brief little
Please.
thing. The first book I wrote, Fast Track, it was before I met and worked with Wolf, but I was at CNN. And so I started writing it in 94, but I didn't get my agent until 2004, 10 years later. So by the time I left CNN, my third novel was coming out. So just to correct the record.
You were a bit of an overnight success.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It doesn't happen that way.
Tear gas.
Tear gas.
How in the world did such a nice guy get tear gassed?
Well, because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was, when I would be, you're right. I really did want to go into politics. My dad was a lawyer. He and I were going to go into practice together. And then I was going to use the law as a stepping stone to get into politics. And since probably the early 60s, my plan, my career trajectory was to, get into politics, alderman, mayor, governor. And if everything had turned out the way I had intended, I would have been president. And
seriously,
that was your... I really was planning to, that was the goal.
Interesting.
But for the good of the country, I decided to go in a different direction. And the transition happened when I was a student at the University of Wisconsin in between 68 and 70, which was the anti-war years. A lot of fervent anti-war activity. But I came from a Republican home, Nixon Republicans. War is good business. Invest your son, that kind of thing. And so I was bombarded from both the left and the right to take a position for or against the war. And when I was in the dorm bull sessions, I'd argue the right-wing line of my Nixon Republican parents. When I was home at Thanksgiving, I'd argue the left-wing line I was hearing among my friends at school. And when I was alone, I was confused. And so journalism seemed to be the good perch to sit on to try to figure that out. And of course, my parents thought that journalism is what journalists ran Nixon out of the White House. So as far as they were concerned, I joined the dark side. They didn't call it that, but my mom said, "You've lowered your sights, John." But she also said, if I hear in your reporting any bias, even if I agree with what you've said, you failed. Just give me the facts and let me make up my own mind. And so that was the axiom that guided my career as a journalist. So I joined a campus radio station in Madison, and after Kent State, just about every campus in the country just blew up because the National Guard shot 4 unarmed student protesters at Kent State University. In fact, some of the kids who were killed weren't even protesting. And so I was covering a riot. I never rioted. I never demonstrated. I really didn't know one way or the other how I felt at the time. And the situation was fraught right from the beginning. There were the National Guard was coming from one side, the students were coming from another. I was in the no man's land where rocks were coming down on me that were intended for the National Guard. So I made a beeline across the street, and the National Guard must have thought that I was one of the stone throwers, and a tear gas canister went off right above my head, and I was recording the event, and my parents heard the heard their little boy getting tear gassed, and that led to other things. I don't know. I'm sorry to be giving you such long
No,
answers.
this is great. This is great.
Thanks.
I don't know what the transition was to the Armed Forces radio, but I do know that you interviewed Alfred Hitchcock, and he appears to have made somewhat of an impression on you.
He did because,
Why?
well, I enlisted to avoid the draft.
Yes.
And when I enlisted, I knew that I was going to go into military journalism because I had a choice. But I also got orders to Vietnam. And, plot twist, about 2 weeks before I was to ship out to Vietnam, my orders were changed to Germany. And I was stationed at the American Forces Radio and Television Network in Frankfurt. And my boss, Herb Glover, who used to work at CBS with Walter Cronkite, Herb had a mentor's heart. And he could have interviewed Hitchcock in his sleep. And instead, he trusted this 22-year-old kid not to screw it up. And so, I went and I sat with Hitchcock for 40 minutes, one-on-one in his hotel room. And that really was a life-changing experience because he was, a legendary film director. And, I had a chance to follow my curiosity, and I discovered what I was good at and what I loved. And that really was that crystallized the decision to really, pursue journalism when I got out of the Army and went back to school and got my degree.
Well, so I'm not going to take you through every twist and turn of how you got to places because we could probably talk all night.
Oh, I'm old.
But as a not an evangelical, but certainly a man of faith, did you think that you had hit the lottery when you were hired by the Christian Broadcasting Network?
That was thank you. That's an interesting point in my life. I was with CBN for 5 years, and I'd been working at the NBC affiliate in Madison, Wisconsin. And I really had a desire to do documentary, in-depth kind of reporting. And the station I worked at, didn't really have the appetite for that. I was getting awards for the stuff that I was doing, and I was looking for an opportunity to do more in-depth reporting. Somebody suggested, I did not know about the Christian Broadcasting Network other than when I was in the Army, I worked with a guy, Mike Little, who had been an announcer at CBN. So I applied to the network, but I saw Pat Robertson and his connection with the viewer, and they had a news division that was founded by Bob Slosser, who had worked as an assistant national editor at the New York Times. So I mean, there were journalistic chops in play at CBN at the time, and they were trying to, get a news division up and running. So I applied, but I purposely didn't use God words and things like that. And of course, human resources rejected me immediately. But it was the same day that I was calling Mike, my friend, Mike Little, to find out more about the job. And I said, I just got a rejection letter. And he said, well, it sounds like personnel's not using very good judgment. So turns out Mike wasn't just an announcer at CBN. He was the executive vice president in
Oh
charge of
my.
the news division. So it pays, it's important. Who you know matters. So he got uh, my whole application back on track. I went to CBN. I don't know if I felt like I'd hit the lottery, but because I knew I was taking a risk because it wasn't mainstream journalism. It was sort of, John Hart at NBC he was a preacher's kid, and I went and talked to him. I talked to him on the phone about, this decision I was contemplating. And he said, well, a lot of mainstream journalists consider this the lunatic fringe. And so, if you're thinking of getting back into mainstream journalism, might not happen. But I did it anyway because they were doing in-depth reporting and I was much more evangelical at the time. So, but it was always a struggle because their news division felt that the mainstream media was hopelessly liberal biased. And so we should be conservatively biased. And my argument is no, two wrongs don't make a right. So I was the raving liberal in the newsroom, and it was always a kind of a struggle. And yet at the same time, I ended up covering the White House for the last 3 years of Reagan. And, it was a great experience, a lot of wonderful people there. Um, but I don't know if I would say it was like hitting the lottery. Um,
Well,
I don't think I ever hit the lottery yet. I married
and
Cindy. I married Cindy.
a good Christian would never play the lottery, right?
Oh no, that's not true. Not
Okay, well,
I have.
I have a clip of you at that time. We're
Oh
going
my
to take
God.
about a minute and look at it. And so here we go.
It's 9 a.m. in the West Wing of the White House. Presidential spokesman Larry Speaks is meeting with his staff. In a few minutes, he'll be briefing reporters.
Number of Libyan questions out, nothing that we're going to comment extensively on.
A few dozen yards away, the White House press corps begins to assemble for its twice-daily sparring match with Speaks.
Well, it's the adversarial relationship. Larry Speaks is on one side of the fence and I'm on the other side. We both know what we're trying to do. What he's trying to do is make certain that the president's policies, plans, programs, intentions are put forward in not only the best possible light, but if possible, a perfect light. On the other hand, I'm trying to find out what's really going on here.
Ronald Reagan also calls the relationship between the press and the presidency adversarial. I asked the president if he finds that frustrating.
To a certain extent, yes. It sometimes seems less of a hunt for news than to see if they can't catch you.
Yeah, that was the day we followed Larry Speaks around trying to do a piece on the White House press corps versus the president. And that was an important takeaway for me because I discovered that, Larry Speaks' job was to make the president and his policies look perfect. My job as a reporter is to find out what's really going on.
Right.
And that is the essence of the adversarial relationship between the press and the president, no matter what party the president is. It's a firing offense for reputable journalists to make things up.
John, what was that like? How did it feel to sit in the White House briefing room with Sam Donaldson?
Oh man, I mean the White House briefing room is it's small. It's very small. And there are only like 48 assigned seats, and then anybody else just has to scramble. And I was there when let's see, it was Leslie Stahl, Chris Wallace, Sam Donaldson. They were the network correspondents. Helen Thomas was with UPI.
Now, and I know that Helen fell on some difficulties over the Palestinian question.
She did.
But there's an interesting connection that I have with Helen Thomas. She was doing a cross-country campus tour. And I was in a theater and she was taking questions. And I was really curious to know, who's the next generation of political superstars? Is it another Kennedy? Who's coming up through the ranks?
What year would this have been?
This was in 89. 88 or 89.
Okay.
And so I really wanted to know. And she looked at me and she said, how about you?
Ooh.
And I
was
thought,
that a life-changing thing for you?
I think it was, John. Because then I did go into politics for a time, never to that level. But I remember that exchange with her and feeling like I had seen a little bit of what it was really like in Washington, D.C., and in that world and how it might be to be involved at that level.
Right. And Helen came and I taught journalism in D.C. for a while, and she came and spoke to one of my classes. And the assignment I gave the students is everybody had to have a question for her, and they had to write up her talk, as a radio piece and as a newspaper piece, because it's different kind of writing. And basically they were talking to her about her career, how she got started and stuff. And the best lead was, she looks like your little old lady and she looks like your grandma in tennis shoes, but when she opens her mouth, watch out.
Yes. And that was the truth.
That was the truth. Oh, she was a no holds barred, blunt kind of person.
Sure. I also was in a leadership program, and we talked with Sam Donaldson, and the man was terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
Because why?
He was so uh, smart and incisive, and you could tell he didn't suffer fools gladly.
Right. Yeah.
And you didn't want to be among that company.
Right. Yeah. And he was a very clear, I mean, I think he's still alive, very clear communicator,
Yes.
nice and succinct. And yeah, and definitely knew how to ask the cogent question.
Sure. Well, I really enjoy the thoughts of seeing you in that room. In fact, I think that clip shows you in the second or third row, sitting there taking notes.
Something. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm in that. I don't know if I'm in that piece as a reporter, but I was, I was definitely there for 3 years, and
Yeah.
yeah, that was a great experience, a wonderful experience.
Well, so 5 years there,
Mhm.
and then you moved to CNN. I assume you went to Atlanta first
That's
before
right.
you went to DC.
That's right. 88 to DC or to Atlanta as a writer, and I was in Atlanta for 17 years. And within a year, they made me an editor, and so that's pretty much what I did. I really wanted to get back on camera to report, but it never quite caught on, and that's okay. I think it was probably good in the long run, because if I had become a correspondent at a network like that, the first big story comes along and you're shot out of a cannon.
Well, like Wolf was.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that can be that can cause major damage for the family.
Sure.
And the kids were little, and so I think that the time was well spent being able to be there, for them growing up and still, have a good income for them.
I think too that there is such a great value of having a team member who can do the things that you do so well. And so there were some huge stories that you covered with Wolf, helped Wolf cover the Persian Gulf War, the Great Recession, Barack Obama's election as the nation's first African American president.
Right.
What did you do for Wolf, and did I miss anything on that list?
Oh, there are plenty of stories that, I mean, for 25 years, there are a lot of major stories, the OJ trial. But as an editor, my job is sort of like being a goalie. You're supposed to make sure that it's accurate, that the copy is clearly written, the stuff on the screen is spelled correctly, and then it makes its slot. And so, no one, in hockey, everybody sees the great saves. In journalism, they're only aware of you if a mistake gets through, a mistake of one sort or another. And so, it was sort of a quality control kind of person, to a certain extent, coaching the writers as needed, although the writers were so good that, I was in awe of how they would be able to take a blank screen and then make magic happen over and over and over again on short notice. The writers are really the unsung heroes of CNN. And and Wolf, of course, he's so smart, he can ad lib the whole show. And but he was a very affirming kind of person to work with, and very much a dad kind of a person, including the dad humor. He'd quote his dad all the time. He'd say, as my late father David Blitzer would say, "Rich or poor, it's good to have money."
I did find a clip of him, I think, singing at I don't think it was a White House Correspondent's dinner or something. It was but he had, he was willing to make light of himself for a laugh.
Oh, absolutely.
Very impressive.
He loves it when Saturday Night Live spoofs him.
Yes, yes. What have you ever thought and prioritized the single most important story that you helped him do?
I couldn't answer that.
Too many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, every story is important.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the reason that it's so difficult, is that you give the same attention of the same standards are used no matter what the story is. I mean, I remember this was before I started working with him. The night of the first Gulf War happened, and I mean, the CNN newsroom in Atlanta was throbbing with activity, and I can remember looking up, and all of the monitors, they were all tuned to different networks. All of the networks were carrying us, and that's when I realized, man, we've got to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm just responsible for this very small sliver of airtime. But it was real important for the writers to make sure they were on their game and getting it right.
So you left in 2013, and there's been I don't know, a sea change in things since then. But overall, how has the digital age changed the practice of journalism?
Oh man, how much time do we have?
Not that much.
I know. It has for both good and ill. I mean, I wish we'd had cell phones when I first started out in journalism. I wish we had Google when I first started out. I wish we'd had laptops. I mean, we had typewriters. We had film. So, I mean, obviously things changed over the years during my career, but the stuff, the technology that made journalism more efficient also made it possible for lies to proliferate. The axiom is, a lie can get around the world before the truth can even get its shoes on. And and so what we have now, and I'm speaking not just to Trump people, but I'm really speaking to everybody who's got a cell phone, because when you hit share, you're a publisher. And there's no editor sitting on your shoulder going, how do you know that's true? Where'd you get that? Which is what happens at reputable news organizations. You would be surprised at how much stuff doesn't get into print and doesn't get on the air because it doesn't pass muster. And passing muster doesn't have anything to do with any kind of political calculus. It has to do with the integrity of the information. How reliable is it? How reliable are your sources, and so on. And so, that's my biggest concern. And of course, Russia is capitalizing on this. We have now artificial intelligence. We have deep fakes. It is people. I was at a writers' conference, and a woman was shaking her fist at me saying, you're just fake news. And I said, where do you get your news? And she said, Breitbart. And my jaw dropped. And she said, well, I have to have my opinion reinforced. And I said, no, actually, she did. I said, actually, you have to have your opinion informed. Yes. And that's the problem. We're in our own bubbles of reinforcement. And yet there are still reliable news sources out there. Reuters, Associated Press, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, BBC, NPR. There are a lot of reputable news organizations and you don't have to sit in front of TV listening to them shout at each other. You can take the time quickly to get the facts, and then make up your own mind, as my mom used to say. But with the internet and with the proliferation of the ability to share things of dubious integrity, factual integrity, we are now awash in conspiracy theories that can go unchallenged.
So let me ask you this. I was going to ask you if you're concerned about its future. That's a kind of a narrow question. Instead, let me ask, where do you think this ends, or does it?
Well, I mean, I'm an optimist, and that I still believe that people they've tasted what it's like to be able to find out information and to find out reliable information. We still try to do that when we get a weather forecast. We still, when we get the sports scores, we're pretty sure that the Orioles won. We can check that out. And so I still am an optimist, and I believe that truth will prevail. I think that, you know, people hate lies. And once they realize they've been lied to and it's verifiable, then that begins to make things change. Um, I'm not saying that I believe everyone is going to come, you know, to see that, but I still think that the preponderance of the evidence comes down on the side of truth. And I think that there's this innate desire for truth that we have as individuals, and that is strong enough that in the long run things are going to be okay. I hope. I can't guarantee it.
You're more optimistic than am I.
Well, okay.
Yes.
Why is that?
You know, I think that goes back to my early biblical orientation with the book of Revelation.
Okay,
I haven't
end times.
I haven't quite been able to shake that one yet. And so I think we're treading very dangerous ground, and that I've watched the same thing happen in politics, where you used to be able to find the Tip O'Neills, you used to be able to find the people who were in it for the right reasons.
Right.
All of those people either now can't get elected,
Right.
or they've been run out of office.
That's true.
And we're left with, you know, I see this, and I'm interviewing you, but I'm going to.
Yeah, good. Keep trying.
You're very good. You're very good. But I see this pendulum swing where we go from right to left to right to left. And I question, what is the event that stops us in the middle, that makes us realize that each swing of the pendulum goes harder and faster and more permanently?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're definitely right. I see the same thing. And I don't know what that event is. I know what you're saying about end times theology, and maybe there's something to that. I don't know. We'll just really,
We'll
I
have to
think,
see.
Terry, we're just going to have to wait and
Yes.
see.
Yes.
And do our best within our sphere of influence to still be perpetrators of the truth, and doing our best, I think, to try to find common human ground.
Yes.
There's a guy I see on the street when I'm walking. We have great conversations. He's a Trump supporter, but you know what? There's so much other stuff that we do agree on, and he's a wonderful person, and we just kind of put the politics aside, and you
Yes.
know, how you doing? How was your operation? You know, that how's the wife? And I think if we can cool the rhetoric a little bit and try to see people as, you know, treat them with dignity, and see them as fellow human beings as opposed to the other, I think we have some hope.
Well, and I kind of see St. Peter agreeing with you. that humanity, that shared humanity.